Hello and welcome once again to MensNet. Tony and I are here at Purchase College at the State University of New York in Purchase, New York. And what are we doing here, Tony, tonight?
Tonight we're here at the Vagina Monologues play. It was founded by Eve Ensler, and we have a problem with this play.
What kind of problems do we have, Tony?
Well, it's twofold. Number one, it seems to be a little anti-male with some of the suggestions they have about women's sexuality, women turning to themselves and other women to satisfy themselves rather than men. And the second problem is it's divisive. It doesn't give any funding for men or boys. It's just for women and girls that the funding goes to. And we feel that's discriminatory.
Isn't this perpetuated by this play?
Yes, it's the myth of the monstrous male all over again, which was a book years ago. As a matter of fact, so much so, Roy, that they actually came out with a T-shirt here, Vagina Warriors, and they want women to consider themselves Vagina Warriors. What that means is that to be seems to be against men in a sexual sense.
I don't believe it's anti-men in its totality. I believe it's more pro-women, and I think there's definitely a difference between those two.
Well, we have numerous articles by Christina Hoff Sommers and Camille Paglia, feminists themselves, that complain that it seems to be very anti-male. For instance, the premise of the whole thing seems to be that women should go on and become asexual or homosexual rather than give in to having sex with men.
I think this play is about empowering women to find out who they are. A lot of women don't even know where their vagina is other than the fact that they wipe it and that they menstruate from it. And I think that this is really about women finding out about who they are as females. I also think if women knew better about their own sexuality, men would be happier.
I've seen it in the city, and I don't think it's an anti-male play. I think it talks about women's issues on many different levels, and it also raises consciousness about women's issues. There are some things about violence in it, and of course, being a board member of the Northern Westchester Shelter, I think that should definitely be brought out. However, everyone can take with it something different when they leave the performance, so perhaps someone might take that away with them. I did not.
Certainly there are several monologues that are rather crass and
you mentioned the one that
yes, there's one called The Angry Vagina, and they actually offered me to do it, but I didn't like it because I don't speak that way. I would never speak that way. There's another one with the name is the C word, and I just thought those were a bit much. But with everything you have to have over the top and then below, and everything's a balance ultimately.
You don't feel that it has kind of an us against them mentality?
Meaning men against women?
Yes.
No, I don't.
Yes, there are very descriptive,
vulgar, if you will.
if you want to use that word, vulgar. It's I guess it's according to how you feel about a woman's vagina.
Because my monologue doesn't say anything about men. It's just about learning to masturbate as a woman. By the way, most men I know masturbate, and most women I know don't. So therefore, I can't say to you, every time you masturbate, is that anti-woman? No, it's just part of your sexuality.
Well, there's a difference there. The problem is that men cannot get as many sexual occurrences as they would like.
Well, perhaps if more women knew that they had sexual organs and that they were sexual beings, maybe women would understand that sex is a wonderful thing, and maybe men would get a little more lucky more often.
I think it's vulgar to state it in public that it becomes an object, and that's what Eve Ensler has seemed to have done here, is that, do we really need to talk about it as openly?
It's an object. It's a part of the body.
And yet, when men say that, women condemn them. That they're.
What do men say?
When women have always charged men for treating them like sex objects, and yet this play seems to do that.
I don't think it does that at all.
A lot of the performances seem to be anti-male. Let's hope that you don't experience that tonight. What do you think about the play, though, overall?
Well, you'll have to ask me on the way out that question, but
you haven't read anything about it?
I have not. It's been around a long time. I've certainly heard about it, a lot of controversy about it, and my boss is in it.
The play celebrates women's experience, and it helps them gain strength from some of the tragedies that they've gone through, and that's not necessarily anti-male.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that women are talking about their sexuality and their feelings.
Rather than call it anti-male, what I'd call it is a celebration of women and of females and of vaginas. And I mean, come on, vagina can be best friend to some men, so why would that be anti-male?
Is there any male version of the Vagina Monologues, like the Penis Chronicles or something like that?
No, not at this date, and we don't think they would get funding for, a play like that.
Maybe it takes place all the time out in Iraq on the battlefield and in the combat. Men suffer greatly, as we know. They have their needs also there, but they're sacrificing for our country now. I don't see that so much for the woman's side, and when the women do it, it's the Jessica Lynch story that we hear about, not the brave men who have given their lives.
Women, of course, feel that they've been subjugated and repressed over the centuries. I understand part of this evening's performance is going to talk about some of the things that are still going on in some of the third world countries in which women's rights are subjugated and women themselves are violated.
I've seen the show. I wouldn't say that it's against men. There's a lot of discussion about domestic violence.
The ratio of men to women in domestic violence is about even, but you couldn't tell it from what you're going to hear tonight at the Vagina Monologues. It seems to be, as one woman told me just recently, thousands of men abusing women.
Right. Well, recently Amnesty International claimed that 1 billion women around the world were victims of rape and violence. How did they document that, Tony? I never saw anything about any documentation for these erroneous charges.
The very poignant words that they talk about, especially in Pakistan and Afghanistan, that there are atrocities in this world going on with this.
That's true. Women are abused in other countries. However, men are tortured and killed. So it isn't just a one-sided thing. I mean, there's a lot of atrocities.
But this was never meant. You're saying a one-sided thing. This was never meant to be shown to be a one-sided thing. This is not a man-bashing play in any way. This is about women's vaginas.
Men do go to war, that men put on uniforms, men declare war, and if you look at the number of women in Congress, you could probably count them on one hand.
Well, Tony has
something is wrong with that picture.
Tommy has
the reason there's not a lot of women in Congress is because there's a lot of men's names on the Vietnam Memorial Wall and other war memorials. Men fought and died. They had the obligation. You said that before that men started wars. That's true. But also men have died in those wars. We haven't sent women out to die in those wars.
Do you think that Americans can go into other countries and change a culture in a year or two? I mean, hasn't it taken hundreds of years in some cases to change culture?
I think certain things can be changed rather quickly. I think surgical procedures or not so surgical procedures that deform women's genitals can be stopped very, very quickly indeed.
Well, don't you think that is happening to men in this country? With circumcision? I mean, a lot of doctors say
I don't regard circumcision as a deforming procedure.
Well, some men do it.
Again, I'm a pediatric surgeon, and I'm frequently called upon to perform circumcisions.
Well, you have a stake in it, though.
No, I don't, but parents do, and children with potential problems do.
Why don't we just say no war?
Right. Well,
no war.
Pie in the sky, and
let's speak up for that.
Well, say that to Golda Meir, Indira Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher. Right. The women who all sent men to war.
They sent men to war.
Yes, they did. They all took their countries to war.
Well, does it make it right?
No, but you're saying that men start wars. Men
do.
Well,
what did you pick out? 3 women? Look at the history of humanity or inhumanity. It's endless.
Well, with women becoming leaders today, they still have an obligation to fight enemies that do something bad to their countries and their interests. They're all their citizens, men and women.
If all the men said, no, we will not go to war, we won't have war. And the women would be thrilled to keep their men home and their sons from dying.
Well, we have to elect leaders not to take our country to war, and women have a majority of the vote in this country. So that goes to show you right there that they're culpable.
if they just said no. If every man just said, "No, honey, I'm not going,"
Right.
we wouldn't have a war.
Okay, if we had said no,
Yes.
we would be saluting a swastika today, probably. You know that?
I'm talking about also the German men should have just said, "No way."
Tony brought a flyer tonight for us to pass out. Can you tell our viewers exactly what's on the flyer that you were handing out tonight?
That's right. Our camera crew is handing out a flyer here at Purchase College, and I'll read it. The Vagina Monologues and V-Day. Eve Ensler's play and her Vagina Warriors reveal a feminist fanaticism that uses a vulgar, hostile, and destructive approach in addressing men's and women's issues. The contradictions. Erotic exhibitionism, vagina objectification, and homosexual recruitment show that personal dignity and social responsibility are not priorities for these women. Did not feminists demand sexual harassment laws and speech codes that would keep men from expressing the same language and ideas used in this performance? Wasn't it women who complained that men constantly thought about and with their genitalia? It seems these women have become the men they said they hated. Gender divisive. Raising money so that only women and girls are protected from violence is a one-sided anti-male agenda. Disgracefully, even young boys are not mentioned as worthy of protection and are therefore considered guilty at birth. The monologue's unsympathetic conduct will convince people that women are culpable for their seldom but still serious state of sexual victimization. These sexual celebrities who blame only men for becoming vagina victims should be ashamed.
Very powerful stuff, Tony, that you wrote.
Right, and also I have a listing here of the downside of being a man and a boy. While watching the performance tonight, we ask that the patrons think about the following. Boys have been the victims of clergy sex abuse more often than girls. Boys get killed by their own mother more often than girls. Boys actually succeed in committing suicide more often than girls. Women are more likely to physically abuse their children than men. Men die in the workplace on hazardous jobs more often than women. Men get raped in prison more often than women. Men have died from the obligation of war much more than women. Women are as likely to initiate domestic violence as men.
Well, let's get back on the subject of the play tonight. Tony, why don't you step in here? You had some questions for the doctor?
We found that the funding from the Vagina Monologues play go to help women and young girls organizations, and we found that was a little discriminatory. They totally leave boys out of the loop. For instance, the Ms. Foundation for Women, which came out with the Take Our Daughters to Work Day program years ago, totally discriminated against boys, and so that's why we're here tonight.
That's changed, so it's now Take Our Children to Work.
Well, and that was because of our efforts, because we were down there at the Ms. Foundation demonstrating every year and sending out flyers or letters to the Fortune 500.
Some of it seems to be very anti-male about men being abusers and rapists and things like that.
I think if we remember that the Vagina Monologues is anti-violence, you need to understand that women are most often abused by men, but they're also abused by other women. And of course, women's bodies are used as spoils of war. And that's necessarily one man. That's more of a cultural issue. So if we can remember that violence against women is wrong regardless of who the perpetrator is, it's anti-violence, definitely not anti-men.
What happens to young boys? Don't they deserve to be protected from violence?
They absolutely do, and the Northern Westchester Shelter actually has an award-winning program called the STAR program, and they go into schools, and it's called Students Terminating Abusive Relationships, and boys and girls are in this program, and it's taught by their peers and also from director and other people who are educated enough to teach these type of things. So that does involve teenage boys.
Well, do you think it's not appropriate for women to support organizations that help battered women?
No, that's okay. They could do that, but when you use